Coach Trent Sanderson is an elite high school running coach, founder of Team Prep USA. He's coached multiple Olympians, dozens of All-Americans, and he inspires kids across the country and globe to not only stay relentless, but to find their grit. So, Coach, I don't know if you know this, but Sparkle was coined at Team Prep. It was really hard for me to leave camp and be in that environment and then go back to normal life. And I just missed what that environment fostered for me. And so a couple campers and I, we started sending each other this sparkle emoji when we would have like a tempo to hill workout or just a normal tempo or a long run when we were feeling really sluggish or when we were honestly just missing each other. And we defined sparkle as our happiness, passion, and self-worth. For a long time, running was my sparkle. And then I got addicted to it. And somewhere along the way, when everything came crumbling, I felt like I didn't have anything else. And I really want this podcast and the sparkle movement in general to be a reminder that there's a lot of things that make my sparkle. There's a lot of things that these athletes that you coach make their sparkle. So how do you help athletes realize they're more than just runners?
Yeah, Devi, thank you for having me here, and very insightful. I loved how you I almost tokenized it or coined it of how it made you feel. And I do feel like, running's done a lot for me, and I think running in my world with Team Prep USA, it's more than just running, right? It's about finding yourself. And I do find that going through that level, you start learning about the network and how the network is everything in life. If you think about if you're spiritual in church or schools, education, college is nothing but a network, right? And I love the movie Into the Wild. It's a book, as you know, and being dyslexic, I always prefer to movies. And I do listen to books on tape. But as you remember the end of that book, he realized that life was meant to be shared. And he was a little late on that because he couldn't get across the river after eating the poison berries. But finding that network and then realizing how you need to surround yourself with people that support you, that fan your flame, doesn't douse your flame. And when we start Team Prep each year, kids have to fill out or get references through the community, which is starting to make them realize they have a sense of self-worth, and people have to understand in the community how they are in media, how they act, or the direct response of who they are. So I think that's important. A lot of times camps out there, you just get accepted because you write the check. But it's a little harder to get into our camp, and we pride ourselves in that. And when they come, they literally start connecting the dots with people that are passionate about their lives as well.
Yeah, I completely forgot that we had to get references for camp.
Yeah.
But I'm like trying to remember who I went to, but I vaguely now remember kind of going and asking a couple of my teachers, which is crazy because it's probably, I have different memory of when I probably pinpointed running became really serious for me. But in a way, I wonder, not just running becoming more serious, but if that moment of asking for references was when I was saying, hey, like, what do you believe in me? Can I make this next step? And it wasn't just about running. So that's really interesting because I completely blocked that out of my mind.
Yeah, and I find that it starts making you realize you are part of society. And, as we're born, and we have to be influenced, and it's our parents that do that, which I think is great. I mean, that's a incredible opportunity that a parent gets to do. With that being influenced, they start realizing as they get into 15 and 14 and 16, they start to become their own self. And that's kind of where Team Prep comes into it, where they typically might push a little away from their parents. And what we do is we try to take the things that they would like to say, the parents, and we try to bring that out in our own way where the campers probably would listen more. And we talk about education. We talk about how important education is. We talk about mental health, which I know we're going to talk a little more today about. And we talk about, to be successful, success goes where it's invited. Mm-hmm. And it's difficult sometimes because sometimes we want to push it away. You know, people define the word choking as someone that just shuts off and don't care. But actually, I believe choking is a good step in the right direction. It means you care enough to potentially drop the ball. We've had athletes before from Bermuda, this one gentleman that moved to Crested Butte to go to the academy when the Counterverse started. And he just didn't care. Because if he didn't care, he would never hurt himself. But the problem is, you want to go through life that way, you know? Mm-hmm. And those are things I know you're going to hit on today. But they're passionate to me, important to me. And, you know, running's done so much to me, more than just a running sport. It's kind of a metaphor of life in many ways.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most valuable lessons that I learned at camp is, like, even when I walked away from the sport competitively in college, it was like running couldn't leave me. I couldn't shake this identity. And, you know, there's a lot of stigma in that, is like, oh, am I just looking back on the glory days? But I don't think that's what it was. I think there's some really important lessons that the sport taught me. And now I'm understanding how that drives a lot of my purpose and the other things that I do that make up my sparkle. I think that, like I said before, this podcast, Sparkle itself, is supposed to inspire people to find their purpose. And I remember it so well, like at camp, when you would get really mad if someone said that they didn't care about something, because I think you and I both know that we're human, so you have to care. Everyone cares about something. You really care about coaching. What inspired you to become a coach?
Yeah, good question. You know, wow, I can go so far with that. I find, and I want to kind of bring it into this, is when you say finding your passion, or you said what inspired me to be a coach, is I feel like we go through life and we don't have it figured out. It's okay. Mm-hmm. I used to always say 26 years of age is where you start figuring it out, and sometimes 28. Mm-hmm. And I find that it's hard because you're influenced by your parents and probably community members, possibly that are older than you, that have the life figured out. And then you're asked to get a job at Subway, or I'm going to date myself now because then you get paid $3 or $4 an hour, but you're in California, so I think you're getting paid at Subway maybe $20 an hour or $25. And then you're thinking, well, how am I going to pay the bills with this? And granted, I know everyone's educated enough to know that you get a degree, you get this, but sometimes they just don't put one and two together. And I find that, with that being said, you're influenced. And with running, in my world, you want to feel empowered, right? And I, as a college student, I never forget it. I got this girl named Beth. I gave her some advice and coaching. And it made her day, her month, and her year. And she came back and told me that. And it just empowered me and made me feel so good. And that was the first time that I felt like a part of society, like I could do something. And I want these kids that probably are going to go to the best schools out there, and maybe not the best schools, that's what you want. You want to find your grit. You want to find traction. And traction is just so important because in my world, I grew up and struggled academically. I barely passed high school, barely got into college. They made Cliff Notes for Cliff Notes. People don't know that, but they did.
Interesting.
But with that being said, though, I realize there's not anyone any smarter than you if you just realize it's about putting in time. It's about putting in hours. Malcolm Gladwell, which wrote Tipping Point and Outliers and a lot of New York bestsellers, he's been a big inspiration to me as well, just someone that I've connected with through media. And he said that you could be a doctor, connoisseur of whatever if you just put in a certain amount of hours. He talked about 10,000 hours, which is about 10 years. If you love rocks, you can be the best at rocks. So this person gave me that insight and made me feel so good about myself. And on that note, when I finished college, and you had talked early on, or you're going to talk later on, about networking and about how you become the norm of the group you hang around. And if you remember, I've said that a lot because it changed my life. And I grew up in a small town in Mississippi, and very fortunate. I used to be like, I'm not from Mississippi. I don't have this accent. And I'm so proud that I'm from there now because it makes me unique, right? It makes me me. Everyone else is taken, so you shouldn't worry about being someone else, right? I tell kids that all the time, students. But with that being said, I finished college, and my dad wanted me to go back to Mississippi and join the phone company, which he had put in at the time probably 26, 27 years. And I was like, I just love the family, which you were talking about with team prep, that I had in college. And then I thought, okay, as I transferred colleges, I had to go to a junior college because I couldn't make the ACT, SAT requirement to get into a four-year institution.
Right.
Which I think is ironic because now I get paid to help kids get into MIT and Stanford, and those schools would probably have never accepted me.
Right.
But there's something about a balance. And then I also know as I transferred, I became a better runner when I put myself in a better, stronger environment of runners. So when I finished college, there was this movie, Aspen Extremes. Some parents that are watching this will probably have watched it. And you're like, two people that lived in a van. But they went and became a group with another group that influenced them. And it motivated me. So as I transferred colleges, when I finished, I decided to buy a one-way ticket to Aspen, Colorado because of this movie. And you got to remember, I'm only 21, 22 at the time, that I'm going to go out there and meet successful people. Because one thing I understood real quickly, that we're all going to be asked to leave, this world at some point. And time is our most rarest commodity. So if I have money, I could trade money for time. If I have time, I could trade time for money, right? It's a two-way street. And I don't want to be that person that ends your life to go, I wish I had spent more time. So flew out there and met a great influencer that I ended up moving above his garage, Paul J. Meyer. Multi-millionaire at the time, in the mid-90s, so probably a billionaire easily now. He's unfortunately passed. And he made some big impacts in my life. And he's the one that told me that I should coach. At first, he wanted me to find a job, and he would leave to the Caymans and all of his other homes. And I'd pick him up in his private jet at the Aspen airport. And then one day he left, and he said, when I come back, I expect you to find a job. He came back, I didn't have a job. And then I said, well, I don't know. I'm like, I want to be something, but I don't know. And I finished college, barely, but I did. I got my degree. And then he said, he kept scrutinizing and trying to inspire me to figure out what I liked. And I told him about the story about Beth. And he goes, well, go do that. And I'm like, well, I don't have a connection. I don't have my master's yet. How would I do that? And, coach high school. I said, yeah, but I moved here because I wanted to be successful financially too. And you got to remember, this is me in my 20s, and I've learned what success is defined in many ways.
Right.
But I go there, and he says, here's what you're going to do. I'm leaving again. If you don't have a job as a high school coach, I want you to leave. I was like, woof. That was hard to chew, right? It's kind of like he was teaching me to fish instead of giving me a fish, right? And then I went to Aspen High School, Basalt High School, Carbondale, and Glenwood Springs. That's all in the Roaring Fork Valley. Went to every place. Everyone said no. except for Glenwood Springs. But when I got to Glenwood Springs, it wasn't a head job. It was an assistant coaching job, which I think it was $1,600 for the year. And I'm living in Aspen, right? So I had to keep my other 2 or 3 jobs.
Yeah.
But I got the job.
Got the job.
And then he taught me to do a couple things. He said, treat it like you're treating cancer or rocket science. And as I got the job, I said, but I'm never going to make much money. He says, stop saying that. Mm-hmm. He says, you'll make money in whatever you put value on. And God, it was just so inspiring because, you know, later on when I became a college coach and went back, I got that point. He also said, do the opposite of what everyone tells you to do. You have to take that in context.
Yeah.
Is what he meant though is like, what everyone says, if you do what everyone says, you'll get what everyone expects you to get.
Right.
And then, as you know, I have a cabin yacht on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. And on the back of that boat, it says, stay hungry, stay foolish. And again, the foolish word probably can only be used with the clientele that I work with.
Right.
Because they won't be foolish. Mm-hmm. They'll be drones. They'll regurgitate it, spit it out, do the same thing. So that's kind of what got me inspired in coaching is having that impact with that girl named Beth, and then meeting influencers that made me feel I had self-worth, which really helped.
So how do you define success now?
Wow. Success now is probably a legacy. You know, it's funny. I didn't know where that was to come up at, Devi, in this is obviously making an impact on someone. When we get together every summer, I have about 18 staff from all over the United States and sometimes internationally, and we do have a lot of campers that come in internationally. And they always say, like, Trent, who do you think is going to be the next prodigies? And I said, you know, it's the ones you never expect. The one that never gets their name called. The one that never looks at you. Because they've never had a sense of self-worth. They've never had someone connect with them. Mm-hmm. So I've always found the hardest ones to love are the ones that will connect with you like no other. Because no one's ever felt that way to them. So when we have a kid if they break rules, they go home. But if they slowly get outside the lines, we pull them back in. The hardest ones, they're the ones that potentially do the most amazing things, you know? Mm-hmm. We'll talk later about Kylie McCoy. I'm sure she'll laugh about that one. But with that being said, that is what I'd love to see as someone that comes in that's been difficult and make a big impact. Because I always wanted to get married. I hope that still happens. I always want to have kids, but now I feel like the legacy is team prep.
I mean, it's a very special environment. Like, I can't shake it.
Yeah, you came a couple winters ago and spoke at a campfire.
Yeah, I did. That was really, it felt like a really full circle moment to like come back as an adult. Like, I always, like, in college, I would always be like, oh man, I wish I could just go back and train at camp instead of training in Cincinnati, Ohio. And maybe that was because my relationship with running was tumultuous, and college, there was a lot of things that happened that I just missed being a kid and missed being at the place that team prep made me. But I think what's really important, even as we are away from these environments, is to remember that you have the power to create those environments for yourself, because you can't go to summer camp forever.
Yep.
Yeah. But now I'm coming back into running in a very different way. So although college had a series of events that were honestly very traumatic, they impacted my relationship with my body, I found advocacy work. And advocacy work and helping people speak for themselves and find rights for themselves has been the way that I've been able to heal. And so I recently joined as a board director for a group called the Army of Survivors, which raises awareness to abuse in sports. And we have this awesome program. It's called Compassionate Coaching. And it's all about helping coaches take a trauma-informed approach to their training. I think you've always done a really excellent job at being able to read athletes and how they respond. So the way that you coached me wasn't necessarily how you coached another girl or boy. So how do you do that? How do you know how to tap into someone's response?
Yeah, good question, Devi. I feel like it's funny, we talked about this before, but I do feel like it's trial and error.
Yeah.
And remember, we talked about the 10,000 hours? Mm-hmm. And I feel like you have all these folders. So example, if you would have came to me in 1998 as a girl, Dana Boyle, Dana Soloff now, she's on my advisory board, lives in Portland, Oregon. Mm-hmm. And I would have told everyone, oh my gosh, with Dana and Matt Queen and Mike Waddell, I would tell you exactly how to build a national champion, because Dana was a 2-time. And I realize now, as I went through life, there's so many ways, and everyone's different, and it's difficult. And I do find, though, that as you meet new people and individuals, I wouldn't say you'll still put them in a folder, but you will have a better understanding of how someone possibly can come out of that. And then listening to them. Right. You know, you made a comment about how you're starting running again. And I think you're going to love this new journey, because this is something I'm really strong about, is we have this insightfulness is a finish line, and how we're so like got to be in front. And there's no finish line in life. I mean, we all know what the finish line is. And I find that this is where I feel, and this is just my opinion, but I think around grade 3 or so, maybe 4, there's a point where you're really pushing, you want to be the best student. And not always, I'm just giving you one example.
Yeah.
Where you're literally feeling like, okay, I'm not going to be the valedictorian because this person's got a little bit too much of a lead. And if you're real strong educational wise, you're thinking, okay, by the 8th grade, I'm going to be too far behind. So you're like, screw it. I'm going to go play basketball. I'm not going to be as strong of a student. Mm-hmm. And that's where people drop the ball. Because, see, someone like myself is a C student, a dyslexic person that struggled in their entire life, had to be taught consistency.
Yeah.
Consistency is the most incredible word in the English language, I think. That if we think about, all we got to do is when we fall, just get back up. And the problem is that person that's always pushing the limits and it's always perfect have a really hard time with failure. Mm-hmm. And that's saying that's important. So I'm trying to remember your whole question there, but like I find that, you know, we as coaches have to make them realize that all we want to do is go out and we want to be passionate about our life. Mm-hmm. We want to make moments. We want to have relationships with our dog, with our parents, with a significant other. And knowing that probably the best connection you'll have with someone is being vulnerable. And it'll make you have a stronger tie with them.
Yeah, so I just got a flashback because I think when I first started running, someone would point and be like, that's the fastest girl. And I'm like, okay, that's the standard. I got to be the fast girl. I wasn't in shape to do so. I didn't even know what that entailed. But I would want to go out, and it's like, if you're telling me that's the best, like, that's what I'm going to do. But, I mean, I would fall off, and it would, and they almost put me back down to junior high until I cried, and I said, I just want to be with my friends, and I got to stay on varsity. But jump a couple years later when we met and we started training together, went down to the Florida State Relays for the first time. Remember, oh my gosh, the sunset was the most beautiful sunset I've ever seen. Was the night of the Florida State Relays, because I was running the 2 miles, so it was at nighttime. And we're warming up, and it was cotton candy skies like no other. And I was like, this is why I love track. It's under the lights. It's a circle, you know which way you're going. and
all lefts.
And, there's a stadium. You're seen.
Yeah.
Whereas cross country, it's very in the dark. But I'll tell you what, I shot out like a cannon. We went over the race plan, didn't follow it. And I didn't want to let you down. And because I knew the type of girls that you coached, and I just wanted to be part of the crowd. Shot out like a cannon, went out with the first girl, tanked within 3 laps, and I ran like an awful 2-mile time. But when I got off the track, I'm waiting to be yelled at. I'm waiting to be told, what were you doing? Why didn't you slow down? Blah blah blah. And instead, you're like jumping up and down like I won the race. And I was so confused. But you said you went after it, and you tried. And I think in a lot of ways, my vulnerability has been my superpower. Took me a long time to realize that, because there's guilt and shame that's associated with vulnerability, especially as a young girl. But I also never fit that mold of perfection that a lot of kids were at camp. And so you talk about being a C student. I was a C student. But what do you say to that, as far as the dichotomy that exists, especially in distance running, is like you're rarely getting C students. There's those kids are at the top of their game. They're going Ivy. And me, I'm just trying to hang along with the crowd.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of ways I can go with that.
Yeah.
So this is funny. I'll sit down and I talked briefly before we had the start of this about meeting this acting coach, and hopefully she'll hear this podcast too, that I met her in Waikiki, Honolulu, Hawaii.
The best.
Gosh, probably about 25 years ago. And she gave me some great advice. And what she was saying is, be authentic, be genuine. And when I would meet some of these parents, they said, so what is it you do? I know you work with students around the world and you do these camps. And I said, I teach A students to be C students and keep their A's. So it's almost like, and I tell them all, like, okay, you're a great student, right? A lot of our students are, like we talked about. Mm-hmm. What if they treated the oval on the track the same way they would do academics? Just break it down. And so remember when I mentioned as a dyslexic C student, I just broke it down. Because when I mentioned earlier about the kids that I work with, they're going to get into probably the schools of their choices. They're going to get into certain schools because their parents buy a building. That's happened already in my program at a school. Be careful, because they have to go find their own journey. Mm-hmm. You know, we had a gentleman years ago, and met with him in Sarasota at this Greek restaurant, and his son, he invented one of the largest food chains in America. And it's a little bit above fast food, but not too far. And he was excited to tell a story. And because I was there, his son listened, because he came to camp and loved it. He was so passionate. His father told him a story and said how he got fired as a line cook and didn't finish college and did this. And then he wanted his kid to get into a certain institution. Well, I could say that. He wanted him to go to Brown. And I knew his SAT, and he wasn't going to get into Brown. Mm-hmm. But his dad had probably had some connections and could get him into Brown. The problem is, and I find, then he would go in as a bottom 15 percentile. He would always be told every day he wasn't good enough. There are those Rudies out there, the movie Rudy. Mm-hmm. Some people just love to be against the odds. You need to find and understand the student or your kid of what kind of person there is. Because not always, but normally, you need to feel wanted. You mm-hmm. need to feel good. You need to feel like you can thrive a little bit. That's important. That's healthy, right?
Right.
So I will say, those Rudies out there that go in a situation, make sure you have someone in your corner that supports you. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we talked a little bit about being in situations where you're only defined as a runner. And we talked about it some when you were back then. We talk about it a lot now. Mm-hmm. Every client that comes on board, they have to have a hobby. And they're like, Coach, what do you mean, like a hobby? I need you to be part of the student council. I need you to play an instrument. I need you to do something else other than just being a student and a runner. Mm-hmm. Because when you have areas of that, then you compartmentalize better. Mm-hmm. Because if you're only a runner and you have a bad race, how are you going to feel? Because you're going to have a bad race. That is guaranteed. Right. And you might have multiple ones. And I always tell, like, when someone has difficult times, I'm like, there's a blessing. There's going to be something that's going to come of it. Mm. And they're like, well, I've been blessed a lot. And I have kids that tell me that. But then they always come back down the road. Not always, but they struggle. And they go, oh my gosh, it was the best thing ever.
Yeah.
Because now I know I can't fail. I just do it more intelligently the next time, right? Mm-hmm. And it's helped shape me. But with these A students that I work with, and I don't want to say all of them are, but I would say 98% of them are, they get value out of it. We teach them how to fail. Mm-hmm. And they find satisfaction of that. You know, perfectionism is not a very good word. I find that it cripples a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And you know this because you've been in the education world as far as in college and stuff. And one of my best friends is he's a 10-year professor at Wesleyan now. He's over the psychology department. And he used to be at Yale, and even at Wesleyan, he plays a big role with the SAT, ACT. Mm-hmm. And they're now bringing it back in, but for many years there, they were pulling it out.
Right.
Because they're realizing people don't become successful that are perfect SAT, ACT.
Right.
What makes someone successful? As you know, with TED Talks, it's gotten big over the last decade. Grit, find your grit, right? And it's funny, we have been doing that for 2.5 decades because we find that's inspiring. That's going to help someone's success. And I've always felt like, what if you can help nudge grit, right? Because we don't even know, but grit might be inside you that you didn't even know until you can find someone that gets some satisfaction like I did from Beth, right?
Right.
And then they find their grit. Mm-hmm. And then they go, oh, and then look out because they've never had a runway and they freaking just crush it. Mm-hmm. And that's what I find if you look at some of our probably most successful people on the planet, I think they've had that issue. You know, Malcolm Gladwell has a thing, David and Goliath. Mm-hmm. It's not just a biblical thing, and it really makes your mind shift of who does have the advantage.
Right.
And he talks highly in there of dyslexic people that struggle. Mm-hmm. And it's so funny, not always, but most of your type A students are introverts. Mm-hmm. And I tell students that I work with, if you're introverted and not connecting on every dot, and you're not the most popular person at your school, it's probably a great sign. And, you know, there's some people in our life that do crush it. And I tell them, and there's so much insight. They go, okay, coach, well, I want something more difficult. Mm-hmm. Do you remember I used to say, hardest thing in college? Do you remember what the hardest thing in college was?
People stealing your peanut butter?
That was part. No. It was your roommate.
That was my second guess.
Yeah.
Because you told us not to live with other distance runners. You said go live with a soccer player, pole vaulter.
Because you don't see them all the time.
Right.
And you have to learn to share space now with someone totally different.
And they can
not
steal
your
your
parents.
Peanut butter.
Yeah, they can steal your peanut butter. That's a different story, which is a great one. But it's important. And then I find that as we work with students, we had a gentleman, Noah Gady, and I'm sure he'll probably hear this.
I remember Noah.
Yeah. And he came to me one time, and he's so tall now, he's like 6'5", but I think he was at the time a lot shorter, maybe down 5'6" or 5'7", because I looked down to him. And he said, Coach, he said, I listened to your speech last year, and I want you to pick my roommate, and I want you to pick a difficult one. And I said, really? I said, but you're one of our best kids. You can have anyone you want. I said, yeah, but you said that the hardest thing in college was your roommate. And I want to have a very difficult roommate so then it won't be as hard when I get to college. And I was like, wow, what so insightful. And
he was always so wise.
Yeah. And I think that those things, you know, that I've experienced, I just try to relay over to students when I go through. And I know we've had, mental health being something that's very passionate to my heart, and it's affected Team Prep. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely affected my small mountain town that we run our fairy tale program every summer in.
Yeah, so I want to get into that a little bit. Specifically, in my experience, even if it wasn't in the classroom, there was a level of perfectionism that started to trickle into my training. I think a lot of it was insecurity. A lot of it was also, I was in a really toxic high school environment, and I just felt horrible about myself, and I felt like running could be the solution to maybe things getting better. And that's where it started. But then when I got to college, there were things that happened that were beyond my control. And I saw it happen to other athletes. I saw it happen to other teammates. And I think that perfectionism was kind of shaken up to a whole nother level. But mental health wise, like, I didn't know how to handle it. And it led to a breaking point. How have you helped athletes, or where do you think a coach's role can play in preventing that breaking point or helping an athlete get through the breaking point?
Well, I think as a coach, I think just communicating as a whole group about how it's okay, mm-hmm. how we as a human race, I don't think there's not one person that doesn't feel depressed sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. It's important to get that out there. Mm-hmm. So once that's out there, then it makes it more normalized, right? Mm-hmm. And then I think as that happens, I think that then creating a sounding board where that can be communicated to. Mm-hmm. And maybe even bringing up, finding people that you can connect with, that you can talk to. And one thing we do at camp, I think I talked to you about it a little bit ago, is having people that you can connect with either weekly or bi-monthly, having a friend that you can hold accountable of things that you want to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to make people understand genuineness and vulnerability, like we said earlier, is good. It's a good thing to talk about. Mm-hmm. And I think having that out there openly is important. I think it's also important to shut off. So I used to tell this a lot. If you want to remember my lectures in college, when I lectured, but my experience in college, I would never wear athletic stuff on the weekends when I went out. I wanted to wear my dress shoes, get out, and I wanted to hang out with friends that didn't run. That used to irritate my running family because they're like, why won't Trent go? I'm like, I need a break. And I tell all of our students, I want you to have friends that don't run. You got to have that. I mean, can you imagine if you're number 2 on the team and number 1 is your roommate and you're every day traveling and you are always living with your parents and you already understand each one's space and all this stuff, and now you have to learn space all over against someone that doesn't really even probably love you, they don't even know you. You can remember your parents, their job is to be there for you. And
to love you.
You get that. Yeah. And the other kids are like, they don't give a crap, So it's important to make that open discussion. It's important to make people feel comfortable about talking about it. Mm-hmm. And now we even got the pandemic to deal with, which is a game changer.
Right.
And I look at now of some of these young adults that didn't have their first year of college at all. Can you imagine going to college? We talked about earlier is nothing but a network, right?
Right.
Especially the first 4 years. I'm sorry, colleges and universities. I'm not putting it down, but let's be honest. It's teaching you how to be an adult.
Yeah.
They didn't have that. They have way less social skills now. Mm-hmm. And we're going to see that in the next decade or two.
Right.
With this issue that unfortunately has happened, which is possibly out of all of our control why it happened. Mm-hmm. but I think there needs to be more advocacy, a little more connection for that.
Yeah, so are you seeing kids struggle right now with social connection, even when you're putting them in the environment of camp, now that we're able to go back to camp?
Yeah, and it's what I mentioned before, though. I do find that generation, and I'm trying to understand the generations and how they stop and start when they start, but that whole pandemic now has moved on further, but that's the one I'm real worried about. Because they didn't have that social connection to college.
Right.
And some of them just literally almost went through their whole college degree in their homes.
Right.
So think about it. You go from there, you get a job, possibly get married, or you travel abroad. They didn't get to do any of that. So we're going to have a problem there for sure. I will say, I think it's affected our parents too, the ones that are raising the next generations, are the ones that I'm seeing now. People ask me all the time, parents and even education institutions, what is it that you think with spending, 30 years with teenagers? Remember I told you 10 years, you're kind of a connoisseur or a doctorate, is just learning all by things. And I'd say the biggest thing I would say, and hopefully this makes the final cut, is delay your kid. Best advice I'll ever give anything out there.
Why is that?
It's been so put out there, is push your kid to the front of the line. If they can skip a grade, skip a grade. My opinion, but I guarantee you there's a lot of people out there that would higher education that have done well in the world, that have traveled abroad, would agree with me 100%, is as you rush that dynamic, you get a huge misleading idea. And I'll give you a good example. We have a lady that's part of our staff that is going to be the head physician at the Paris Olympics.
Nice.
Gloria Beam. And she went to college at extreme early age. And I guarantee you, if you would ask her if she could go back and change it, she would. Because she loses, or I think someone would lose her social interaction, connection. And let's take it to another level. Malcolm Gladwell again. He talks about hockey players and how back in the day, and he still is supportive of this, but it was even bigger back then because now people were aware of it, that all professional hockey players were born within 3 months apart. And 90, I think it was 88 or 90% of them were. Isn't that crazy?
That's really...
And I'm not going to know the exact 3 months, but let's say January to March.
Right. Interesting.
Well, think about 6th grade and 7th grade. Or let's go back to age 6 and 7. So to be like a gymnast, you start pretty young, right?
Right.
To be a hockey player, you start pretty young. The Wayne Gretzky's of the world, all those. So can you imagine if you were born at a certain day that puts you into a club 6 months older at age 6? Wouldn't you agree you have an advantage? And you're playing more. You're getting stroked more. You're saying how good you are. And then they did this study where they took some people that were not in that and gave them that, and sure enough, it happened. And when I bring up really crazy metaphors, I talk about the runt and the litter, puppies.
Yep.
So every year our dogs would have puppies, and we didn't have the money to get a dog fixed. So we'd climb under the house and get all the puppies, and it was a long climb because we had an old house that we kept building on in Mississippi. And there was always one we couldn't reach. And you would look how they were all connected, but there was one you couldn't reach. And not always, but because sometimes they're already, but it does happen often more than none. The one that didn't get touched, the one that didn't get loved, became the runt. Then everyone picked on. So I think that if you would delay and go to kindergarten or 1st grade a year older, huge advantage. Think about it. You're gonna have better motor skills, right?
Right.
So why in the hell do people keep advancing?
I want to tap into this just a little bit further. So when you train young girls, right, a lot of times the narrative of growing up is that you need to be good enough or you need to seek validation externally. And then you get older and you start to realize there also is that balance of having internal validation and being proud of oneself, and it's a balance. But in women's distance running, we see a lot more eating disorders and just overall a little bit more issues that stem from anxiety and insecurity. So how are you as a coach helping or teaching young people, but also specifically young women, that yes, it's important to position yourself in a way that you can thrive, but then that you also don't need this external validation to also thrive?
It's hard.
Yeah.
I will say, I mean, you go to Victoria's Secrets, you go to all this stuff at the very top and go down, right? Because that's what's difficult is we give that validation. You're seeing it more and more, though. People are realizing that health is so important. So I think you need to make a young person understand that, you know, taking shortcuts are going to come with a difficult punishment. And how they need to have balance. You know, I used to talk a lot about, when I work with parents, how you have the hierarchy of needs by Maslow. Safety, you know, love, and all these things. And usually when I tell parents, they go, I love my kid, what do you mean? I'm like, I said, no. I'm like, but there's got to be a point where you just love them no matter what.
Yeah.
And if someone is going to, you know, put the whip out there and be difficult on them, it probably needs to be the coach. And when I work with a kid, they're part of their high school, and I have no intentions to ever take them away from their high school. I kind of just help tutor them at another level. But I want them to understand that when they're in that situation, the parent needs to just be there for them, love them no matter what. So when I was born with my parents, my dad, he did some things that really helped me, but he would always say, you know, if you don't make over a C, you can't play. And I always wished that he was the guy that bought the football uniforms, you know. And as you know, they make movies about that now, the ones that do that, because the freaking parent just goes apeshit and crazy.
Yep.
And there needs to be that balance. And I think once there's that balance, then they also need to be able to go out and take a risk and be supported. And you mentioned the inner self. God, I can't tell you enough, because Michael Jackson, maybe you put this on that song on this video, is The Man in the Mirror.
Yes.
What an incredible song. I mean, you think about it, you look in the mirror, that's your enemy right there. And I even do this myself, is assuming. It's the worst thing we can do on the planet. And we assume people think this way of you. It's a shame that we don't, as a human race, really look into it more. It would cure cancer. I mean, the way we think, how we feel. We know, I've said this at camp, when we're stressed about something, you feel sick, right? So how you think and how you feel is physical, isn't it? So when you work with a student, and boys too are having issues, I think that they need to put themselves around people that support them. And then we as coaches need to validate people that are stronger and doing well. There's many Olympians out there that have done amazing things with their body. And I always say, remember I said this earlier today, that you should be so happy you're you, because you're the most incredible girl or person or man or boy in the planet, and everyone else is taken. So you should be so excited you're you.
Right.
And I bring up movie ideas, you know, a lot. And that one movie, I think it was Without Limits, not Prefontaine, but his roommate said, God, it must be nice to want to be yourself. And it was talking about Prefontaine. And he had talked about how he would run the same trails all the time. And it's funny, when I work with a student, I tell them when they go run with their high school, ask their coach if they could just go run that same flat area, just on the long runs, because you want to have variety. I get that. But I want them inside their head to know intrinsically they just create excitement. They could just vision where they're going. Mm-hmm. See, growing up, I was the youngest of 4. And because of that, I was a lot by myself. And I didn't have a lot of social interaction with other students because I lived about 18 miles from town, and we only had one car, and my dad had it usually at work. So I'd hang out with my dogs all day. So you can see I didn't have a lot of interconnection. Kind of like maybe Gloria going to college too early, right? And I felt like with having that happen in my life, I had to learn how to dream. And I had to understand that your perception of reality is reality. See, you probably remember that talk, but I always told students that you don't move in accordance to reality. You move in accordance to your perception of reality. So how you feel about yourself, how you perceive yourself is everything.
Yeah.
And we all know, and I used to tell this at camp, and I'd say, look around the room as you go hang out. And if you'll notice, it's not the way I think it should happen, but it's society. You'll notice that there's always someone that doesn't fit in. It might not look the part, might be as cool. Why are they a part of the group still? Because they have a good energy. And you don't even know it yet, but as you get older, you're like, you don't want to be around negative energy. But you're like, we'll let this person in because they're cool, they're fun, they're popular. And I want them to know that. I want them to start thinking that way, because being rude, being mean, being judgmental is such a hateful thing. And it'll eventually, karma will come back in people's lives. I believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And I think that to look at a young girl or a young boy, I think getting and seeking people, if you're a mentor that's listening to this, seeking someone that could be there for them as a avenue and a crutch to be able to help them go through their lives. Because you probably remember this, but when you're younger, you look up at adults and a lot of people go, I can't wait. And I always joke, and usually I'll have parents in the room, and I'll tell the kid, there's a song, Jack and Diane, it says, hold on to 16 as long as you can, which we have been taught that, which is wrong, because life just gets better. It sucks being a teenager. And I'm only saying that not being contradictive, because, I'm a positive person, but I want them to know it gets better.
Right.
It gets so much better. Because why? Because you have experiences. Because all of a sudden you get slapped on the wrist. Oh, wait a minute. I've been slapped there before. I'm okay.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm not going to get to go to the prom with that person. It's going to be okay. Okay. And I get it. And I want you to know that does get better. The problem though, it's kind of like a 2-mile race, 8 laps. If the gun goes off, and before the gun, you stress out so much, and then the first lap or two, you go out like a bat out of hell. You're so freaking stressed out. Do you think it affects the second half of the race? Yeah. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
So I want you to know that you take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. And that's important to see that. And I tell the parents that you're going to get yelled at. You're going to get screamed at. They're going to be pushed on you.
Yeah.
Be solid. Be consistent.
How do you know, though, whether you're a young kid getting ready for a big race or a professional, like an Olympian? We saw Simone Biles back out of competition, right? And it was for mental health and injury. How do you, as a coach, let an athlete then take autonomy to be like, this is too much. I do have to back out of the competition?
Well, I will say on a real positive note, I think her backing out probably really was a good thing for the world to see.
Right.
Oh my God, how would that make me feel?
Right.
And then she does it, and as advocate of the sport, I think it was awesome. Jenny Behringer, Jenny Simpson now. I never forget when she got back from Beijing. She was running at I think at the time it was the Big 12s because they're packed, or Big 12s I think, because they moved conferences. But she's running after being an Olympian and runs against a girl from Florida State University, I think Susan someone, I can't think of her last name. And she's running, and they're not only favored to be way out in front by a lot. And she basically was told too, how much would Jenny beat Susan? And basically it was just going to be her race to lose, right? And she ends up falling down, I think, coming in on hands and knees, and she gets passed. And later on, she gets the interview, and I'm thinking, I hope she says the right thing. And I loved it. She goes, I choked. Like, it was just so difficult. She could have made up all these excuses. And I tell people, don't dig a hole. You'll live a lie, and it'll get more and more difficult to get out of. So you got to be real. Remember your perception. You could change your perception, start living a lie, just moving down a road. And I think with her backing out of that event was good. Now, what do I think as she's developing? I do think we have difficulties when we take these kids at a young age. Tom Brokaw, I know you probably don't know his name, but that was one of the legend reporters from the Today Show, and Katie Couric and all them. They were 1 and 2.
Yep.
But Tom Brokaw did this incredible thing in China about gymnastics and how they took them at age 3 and 4, and how they were so excited, their parents, because they got out of that communism world, had never been or even been in a McDonald's or anything like that. And divers were looking at their arms and how they would bend, and if they bend above their head, they could be a diver. If they didn't have certain types of genetics, they were rejected, pushed aside. But they were in those positions. And I think, though, the problem with that is, going back to those hierarchy of needs, was love there, was support there no matter what. I feel like those need to happen. Here's the problem with our world, and it happens, it's okay, and this is when we talked about the files and the folders, is you're going to get exceptions to that rule. You're going to get someone that just freaking pushes it and crushes it, right? Then maybe something happens down the road, right? Just blows up.
Right.
So the problem, though, is we base ourselves off of other people's experiences, but is it enough of an equation to make an hypothesis, a good information from, right? That's the problem. And I think that her doing that probably helped us realize it's okay, it's important. But I think having a better foundation underneath you.
And on the other side of it, so we have the athlete side, then the coaching side, how do you think bad or toxic coaching gets passed down through generations?
Yeah, so a military approach used to be how people coached. Bill Bowerman, if you do your research there used to be a car, and they'd have this pole across, and they had harnesses where they would just pull the people. And there was also John Wooden, which is, you shouldn't even know his name, even though he's been around. I mean, he's I believe he's passed. I know he has. One of the most incredible coaches in NCAA history. I mean, he won, 15 or 12 NCAA titles in a row. Bobby Knight at Indiana had all this success. Again, though, learned from West Point. I think he coached Coach K, which just retired at Duke. That was something that went a long time in our society. And what's happened, this is such a good insight, is what's happened is, as we evolved in America, and I'm sure around the world too, parents have taught their kids to question, which is a good thing. But it's gotten a little, this is why you'll see that I'm never one-sided, but it's also gotten a little out of hand too. As you can imagine, we have too much insight. I do agree that it's about what are you willing to work hard for, suffer for. It's not about just what you love all the time. You got to love it enough because if you didn't, you'd quit, right? When it got hard. It's something I wanted to hit on you as well about that. But like, I find that that military approach is something that has been difficult. It's happened in gymnastics more than ever. I think the coaches out there, though, are getting a lot more on board. I think that they realize that it's important. I will say it's hard to be a high school coach now. I know that, and I tell them when they go back to their high schools how they should really realize that when you question someone's intent, that's when you're going to hurt someone's feelings. And no one wants that. No one wants their intent questioned. So when I work with kids that come to our program, they're usually quite the good runner. So that means, in my mind, they're kind of the alpha dog of their system. So if they don't go back to practice, if they don't go back and be a part of the team, why would anyone else be a part of the team?
Right.
The only thing I bring up is ask your coach, talk to him or her behind closed doors and say, this is what I'd like to do this year. What do you think? And then reframing it into a question. I think that allows that coach to feel empowered and understand that. And that's an adult thing to learn too, right? Is giving someone what they want to get what you want, right?
Right.
And those are things that we're really passionate about. And, you know, I think with Simone, I think with her pulling out of that competition, I think it was really good for the sport and for sports in general. What I'd love to see is her come back and have the fairy tale, right? So.
And it's so interesting because this whole conversation, everything is so collaborative in the approach to an athlete.
Yeah.
The parent, the coach. I mean, you think about, your kid goes to school, they're not spending that much time with a parent, by the way. They go to school at 7:30, they're with maybe 5 different teachers, then they go to practice, and they're with coaches, and then their parents. So the influences in a young person's life it really matters.
It does.
But I want to talk about you. And like, obviously coaching and working with your kids is part of your sparkle. But what about not Coach Trent Sanderson, but just Trent Sanderson? What is your sparkle?
Yeah, you know, just finishing what you're saying is, again, cohabitating, learning to cohabitate with other people. And just keep that in mind when you send your kid away, is letting them work on that. But sparkle, wow. Well, you know, what was the 3 words of sparkle again?
So sparkle is your happiness, passion, and self-worth.
Yeah. So, you know, it's so funny. Anthony Robbins, you know who that is? He's a motivational speaker. Tony Robbins, Anthony Robbins.
Yeah.
They call him different. And
I've gone by Tony Robbins.
Yeah, I think he grew up out here in L.A. But he talks about a word called CANI, constant never-ending improvement. Love it. You know, when we talked about consistency, relentless. Do you remember that word?
Yeah, I remember that word. I saw the bracelet.
Relentless. So, CANI, constant never-ending improvement. It's so funny. I am not perfect. And, you know, when you have, let's say, your work world right up here, you have if you're spiritual, your spiritual world up here, your personal life down here. As soon as one thing's going up here, then you got to go work on this to bring this up. And you talked about that earlier. As a student, you put everything you could do into running. Yeah. And I'm actually working on that now, because I find that the best teachers in life are the ones that go through it. And some of the people that know me a lot know that, you know, I'm not completely happy with everything, meaning I want a balance, and I've had a balance some, and I got to work on it again, right? been fortunate to go and work with kids and get to go to their Olympics, to be the opening entrance to the Olympics, and get to hang out in Rio at the Visa House and get to hear the most famous gymnasts from Russia in the world talking, and get to hang out with Shaun White on Rio de Janeiro beach, or hang out in London and walk down a strip with Emma Coburn and her father Bill, and a British guy runs out and wants her autograph. And she starts crying, going, God, someone in London knows my name, But, you realize in life that all you're really going to have is the people that you love and love you. Mm-hmm. And my mom was my world. And she passed away in 2011. And it's probably not a day that we didn't talk. And she came to all my talks. And when I became the head coach at Maryland, she went out and put a big wooden sign in the driveway in Mississippi, and left it up there for like a year. And told Dad not to take it down, all those things. And she was always my biggest cheerleader, Mm-hmm. I have a good family. I grew up in a great family, a great loving family. There's some that haven't had that opportunity. Mm-hmm. My parents did an amazing job helping me be a part of that. Since then, Team Prep's got successful. I met a lot of people. Mm-hmm. You said, when we briefly talked about coming and doing this interview, about people you surround yourself with. Mm-hmm. Your intentions of what you're seeking out becomes you. Yeah. And you got to look at yourself. If you feel like the world's going to give you a bad hand, it's going to give you a bad hand. Right. My hat today, it says, find your luckiness. And I do believe luck is labor under consistent knowledge. We have a board member, Stephen Doherty. He's CEO of one of the largest hospital chains in the United States. He said, used to be when people filled out their applications for a CEO or a Fortune 500 company, it said, do you feel lucky? And a lot of people would check yes, and some people would check no. And the check no, those would go to the bottom of the stack. Because people that feel like they deserve something in life, and they feel like they're going to be successful, do well. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many times I fall and falter. And I just take my own advice. Just like when I learned to snowboard, my goal was to fall down 100 times, because I was told, if you fall down 70 times, you'll get it. You won't walk for 3 days. So I look forward to failure. Yeah. So I'm trying to create a balance. That's important to me, and thank you for asking. Again, putting it out there in the universe, right? Yeah. Letting everyone know I'm not perfect. And trying to leave a legacy. And, trying to make moments, because that's what's most important. Materialistic things, they go and come. Yeah. So.
No, you used to say fail better. And I think what's so fun about Sparkle and creating this is that there is this aura or perception that it's all about pink and shimmer, but what happens when you come home at the end of the day and try to rub that sparkle off to go to bed? It's messy. It's not pretty anymore. And I think that's the point, is like, no one's perfect, and it should be messy. That's inherently the beauty. So
I love that movie Notebook.
Of course, you love the Notebook.
Yeah. And I don't feel bad about saying it. I know it might sound like a feminine movie.
No, I just find it funny that you like the Notebook.
But if you remember in the movie,
I remember.
The wife had Alzheimer's, and all the kids keep coming back and going, "Why don't you just go home?" Mm-hmm. Like, she's not going to remember your name. Mm-hmm. And if you remember, there was always a glimpse for about 5 minutes. And when I was in London at the Olympics with Emma, I got to go on a tour. In London, everyone left. It was the best Olympics ever, because everyone thought it'd be too packed, so there was hardly no one there. And it was expensive to be there because of the Olympics, but We got on a big Greyhound, and it had 3 people on the 120 people bus, and they gave us this private tour of London.
Wow.
And I went to go see Queen Elizabeth's statue of her husband. I think it was Queen Elizabeth I. And her husband died of botulism. And she made this statue, which we couldn't even make in the century we live in now. It was made out of gold and all this stuff. And it talked about how she wore a veil over her face in black the rest of her 35 years of her life. And we don't, like that notebook, we don't have any of that type of justification and connection, you know? And I think as a human race, if we can go keep seeking that how cool would that be?
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Coach.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. You're headed up to the Arcadia Relays today to support more clients.
Yeah, I've got some great runners. I always say I think it's the best high school track meet in the United States, probably in the planet. I'm familiar with some other countries, and it's good. It'll be awesome. They say the stars come out when the lights come on tonight, and it'll be some of the best. Wow. So it should be fun, exciting, and thanks for having me.
Sparkle on, Coach. To all the athletes and everyone listening, this is what it's about.
Thank you.